afternoon, everyone. It brings me immense joy to extend a warm and sincere welcome to each one of you for another enriching session of the ICS Wednesday seminar. My name is Kashish Tomar, and I'm a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. I'm honored to serve as the Master of Ceremony for today's session of our weekly Wednesday seminar titled Swaying in the Middle China in Myanmar's Peace Process. The Three Brotherhood Alliance's Operation 1027 in October 2023 sparked a renewed internal conflict in Myanmar, with China's involvement becoming more prominent. China's influence in the internal conflicts of Myanmar was highlighted when Beijing secured a temporary ceasefire between the alliance and the military government. Despite being part of the peace process since 2011, the resurgence of the conflict suggests a possible shift in Chinese mediation. The seminar will analyze China's response to the ethnic armed organization's post-coup scenario and whether it is adopting an issue-based approach despite its role as a mediator in Myanmar's peace process. The speaker for today's session is Dr. Jayshree Bora, who is currently a visiting researcher at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. She is also a non-residential fellow at Hong Kong Research Center for Asian Studies, Hong Kong. Her research delves into the non-Western theory of peace building with a special focus on non-democratic countries and provincial actors. Currently, she is working on a manuscript on Chinese approach to peace building in fragile countries in Southeast Asia. Guiding us through this enlightening dialogue is the chair of today's session, Ambassador Ashok K. Kanta, an honorary fellow and former director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. He is a distinguished fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, and chair of the core group on China of the Confederation of Indian Industry. He served as ambassador of India to China from January 2014 to 2016. Prior to this, he was secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi, with responsibility for about 65 countries in India's extended neighborhood. In his diplomatic career spanning over 38 years, he specialized in India's neighborhood and Asian affairs with a particular focus on China. Before I hand over to the chair, I would request all the participants to adhere to some housekeeping rules. During the presentation, all participants will be muted. You may post your questions in the chat box, or you may also raise your hand during the interactive session, and after the presentation, you will be called upon to unmute yourself and then ask the question. We request you to please mention your name and affiliation while you raise your questions. I now hand over the floor to the chair to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kashish. I appreciate that introduction to the theme of today's Wednesday seminar, and also your introduction of the speaker and myself. Kashish has given the background of China's involvement as a peacemaker in Myanmar. As you're all aware, China convened a conference in Kunming on 10th, 11th January this year, where it was claimed that a temporary ceasefire has been reached between the military government of Myanmar and the Three Brotherhood Alliance. But this turned out to be a very short-lived truce because hostilities resumed soon thereafter. So we need to understand, what is China's role in Myanmar? What is its influence and interest in Myanmar, particularly with regard to the peace process, which is not making a headway at this point of time. There's no doubt about the fact that China is the biggest external factor in the situation, affecting or governing situation in Myanmar. Even though there are limits of Chinese influence that need to be recognized, China has linkages both with the military government as also with the ethnic insurgent groups, including Three Brotherhood Alliance. But it has not really acted as an honest broker. In fact, its primary objective has been to advance its own economic, security, and strategic goals in Myanmar, which remain very important. I'll not go into detail of that. Second point, which I just wanted to highlight, and perhaps Jashi may wish to discuss it later. China has very consistently used ethnic groups in Myanmar as a means of pressurizing the government in that country. It has maintained, linkages with various ethnic groups, especially those which are close to China, like Kachins, Shan, Wa, Khakong, and Thang. It has been, supplying some arms from time to time through various channels. It has leveraged its historical and cultural links with these countries. So this is one side that it has maintained those links. On the other hand, as we are all aware, military junta has been dependent on support from China, especially given its relative isolation in the international community. But China has not been entirely happy with the outcomes achieved through its collaboration with the military junta. For instance, it's worried about border instability. Much of the fighting is along Myanmar's border with China, which has blocked cross-border trade. It also threatens political destabilization of Myanmar, which China would not like to see beyond a point. The contiguous areas of Myanmar have also become hubs for cyber scams, for illegal gaming, drug trafficking, and so on, which has been a matter of considerable concern to China. Moreover, given the present instability in Myanmar, many of its cherished projects, including the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, are not making kind of headway China expected. So it has, maintained its links with the Three Brotherhood Alliance, and Three Brotherhood Alliance in turn also has to try to position itself as an entity which can safeguard, China's interests in Myanmar. One of the three groups in the alliance, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, which, as you know, is the military organization of the Kokang minority, which has tried to oust a rival Kokang group from its seat of power in a key border city, and it has claimed that it has managed to subdue, major organized criminal activities, including cyber scam, to some extent, and also ensure release of Chinese nationals who were stuck there willingly or unwillingly. Ceasefire, coming back to ceasefire, as we discussed earlier, it didn't hold for long. Nothing really to indicate that China exerted significant pressure on either military junta or on the Three Brotherhood Alliance. So it's commitment, its investment in the peace process, to my mind, remains somewhat limited. But I'm sure Jayashree will have her observations on that issue. Now, another problem which China is dealing with, that many of the key border posts along its borders with Myanmar have come under control of Three Brotherhood Alliance or other insurgent groups, and China has been quite comfortable dealing with them directly. I think this is something where we need to examine the Chinese approach and see whether there are lessons for India, because we face a similar situation along our borders with China. China has several advantages in Myanmar, no doubt about it. Its influence is much more deep-rooted compared to India's. But it's still, as the title of Jayashree's talk, indicates China is still stranded somewhere in the middle, and what kind of role it can play, both in the peace process as well as in terms of other development activities or stabilization of Myanmar remains to be seen. So, with these words, I will invite Dr. Jayashree Bora to make her opening remarks. Jayashree, you can talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open the floor for comments and questions. Over to you, Jayashree.
Thank you so much, sir. You have already, it was actually very enlightening to hear from you, and you already have covered a lot of issues which I'm going to speak today. So thank you so much. But also thank you for mentioning about the how India's and China's, we could see whether we face the similar kind of problems when dealing with Myanmar. And thank you so much for such a nice introduction to my talk. And I also want to thank today's MC Kashish Tomar, and thank you so much for the humble introduction you gave. It is indeed brings me really joy and pleasure to speak at ICS's Wednesday seminar, because I started my academic career as an intern at ICS. So I'm also taking a brief moment to thank Professor Alka Acharya, Director of ICS, and Professor Srimati Chakravarti for the invitation to share my research in this platform, and always and supporting me throughout the years. And I'm also really happy to see a lot of my mentors who have joined for the seminar, Madhvi ma'am, Patricia ma'am, Mohanty sir, and Rapai sir. And also it gives me immense pleasure to see Ambassador Nambiar, who has been a special envoy to Myanmar. So sir, I really look forward for your input. So hope I can justify, I really look forward to hear from you after my talk. Starting with, we already have a nice background that the operation, which is called as 1027, was launched in late October by the Three Brotherhood Alliance. Hereafter, I will just say 3BHA. They consist of Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, MNDAA, Thein National Liberation Army, TNLA, and Arakan Army. They are also part of the Northern Alliance of Myanmar, which was formed in 2016, and which also formed the Federal Political Negotiation and Consultative Committee of Myanmar's ethnic armed organizations, which is a block of ethnic armed organizations who attend the peace talks on behalf of the ethnic armed organizations with Naypyidaw, Myanmar government, whether it is junta or the National League for Democracy, Aung Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy. So it is important that the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which was formed in 2019, even though they were already part of the Northern Alliance. So it also says a lot about the internal dynamics in Myanmar, how these ethnic armed organizations are divided, which I will talk in a while. And so in the Operation 1027, as Ambassador Kantha has already mentioned, in January, it started in October, but Beijing started negotiating with both the junta and the Three Brotherhood Alliance only in January. So it also says like how Beijing has waited for at least waited before Beijing entered into the situation. And after that ceasefire, the conflict continued, but as recent as in March 3, there was another talk happened in Kunming between the Three Brotherhood Alliance and the Myanmar military, and they have, in fact, for the first time, they have reached their consensus, the first consensus regarding the peace process. And it is very interesting because one of the first clause in the very first framework is between the EAOs and junta is all parties should ensure that China's interests in Myanmar are not harmed. And it was published in the Northern Alliance. It was published in the website of Northern Alliance. And since these organizations are ethnically Chinese and they are also comfortable with Chinese, the statement came in both Chinese language and Myanmar and Burmese language. So this says a lot about how China is, I would like to say, the word inseparable part of Myanmar's peace process. Even though Chinese government has been using the word non-interference in Myanmar's domestic affairs, but coming with this, we could just see that if the EAOs has made a statement like this for other parties or any other countries, since last year Russia was also actively engaged with military junta, but there are no public statements say thanking Russia or claiming that Russia's interest will be ensured. So this says a lot about how China is intrinsically connected to Myanmar's domestic politics. Coming back to before I talk entirely about Myanmar's peace process, I would like to briefly talk about China and Myanmar's engagement in post-coup engagement. What happened after the military took over? So, in February 2021, when the junta took over, became Myanmar's government, the Chinese engagement in Myanmar was mostly trying to figure out which side to take for. For a long time, Beijing was figuring out whether it should support the junta or whether it should support the NLD. And finally, it acknowledged SAC as Myanmar's official government. And before that, Beijing kept its ties intact with NLD officials. In fact, Beijing had a telephonic conversation also with NLD parliamentarians. So this was also the time when all Chinese investments were put on hold, and Beijing also issued an warning statement to investors, Chinese investors. So this was also a time when anti-Chinese sentiment also in Myanmar, which led to destruction of over 30 Chinese projects. In that time, Beijing advocated for a quote-unquote political solution between military and NLD, but it did not gain any momentum. Again, I would like to say, like, quote-unquote normalcy between Beijing and Myanmar relation was assumed in April 2021 when Chinese ambassador met with SAC leader for the first time. And the new foreign minister, Wana Maung-Luin, he went to China for the first time as well during the same time period. During 2021, China also tried to engage ASEAN in Myanmar's affair. China, in fact, tried to convince ASEAN countries to legitimize the military junta by inviting Myanmar representative in the ASEAN-China Special Summit to when they were commemorating the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-China dialogue. So coming forward to 2022, in 2022 until December, we don't see a lot of bilateral engagement between China and military junta, or neither with China and the EAOs. There are several factors that played a role. Ukraine war, Myanmar junta tilting towards Russia, and then COVID-19, and China was facing the huge domestic pressure for economic crisis. So there was not a lot of bilateral engagement, but there was the then FM Wang Yi and the current foreign minister Wang Yi, he visited Myanmar for Lanchang Mekong Corridor Summit, but he did not particularly meet with the government, the military junta. But here there is, the thing is, even though the Chinese government official, the foreign ministry, wasn't in contact with neither the military junta or ethnic armed organizations, but China's connection with the EAOs are so discreet, so we cannot say that Chinese government hasn't made with the armed organization leaders during that period was completely muted. That is, I don't have any evidence, but that is not, we cannot completely deny the idea of at least officials from Yunnan's government meeting with ethnic armed organization, because even during that time, Lancang Mekong corridor officials, they were visiting Myanmar, and the border trade between Lanchang and Lao Kai was also happening in the border area. So apart from foreign ministry of Chinese foreign ministry, there are certain new actors such as the Ministry of Public Security also was involved. The Minister of Public Security was sending officials during that time because of the cybercrime, due to the cybercrime in the China-Myanmar border. So, in 2020, official engagements were really rare, but that doesn't deny the fact that actors other than the Chinese foreign ministry were making contact with the EAOs in Myanmar. So now coming back to the conflict in Myanmar and the peace process, there are several factors that played important role, and it also complicates China's re-engagement in Myanmar's peace process. First is the emergence of new actors in Myanmar. And then the second is the split between the ethnic armed organizations, especially with the members of FPNCC. And third is the external reasons, such as possible engagement of China's fear of possible engagement of United States. So what are these new actors? So after the conflict, after the post-coup, the conflict was already brooding in Myanmar with the emergence of the National Unity Government was formed, which is the government in exile by the former parliamentarians of NLD government, and they were called People's Defense. They have formed People's Defense Forces (PDF) to fight against the junta, which is known as People's Defensive War. This was even though locally formed by NUG, but it was also later joined by powerful ethnic armed organizations of Shan states such as Kachin Independence Army, Karenni National Progressive Party, and then Karen National Union. And these armed groups have been fighting against the junta since September 2021. The Operation 1027 actually has only intensified the movement against the junta, which was already brooding. But there is the interesting thing is that when Operation 1027 was advanced into a nationwide operation, they always there was a speculation from outside Myanmar and also inside Myanmar that it could harbor a common goal approach, that the ethnic armed organizations in Myanmar could have a common goal approach towards fight against the junta, and this could be a hopeful it will be a hopeful situation for Myanmar and bringing the junta down. In fact, the Arakan Army spokesperson, he said that we should aim for a common goal. But the thing is, the interstate ethnic conflicts were not stopped, even though the armed organizations were fighting against junta, but there were also inter-ethnic conflicts were happening between TNLA and the Shan State Progressive Party and Shan State Army and the Restoration Council of Shan State, RCSS. And this is very interesting because coming to the connection with China, and some of these groups has close link with China, but some are not comfortable with have a direct close relationship with China, especially the Shan State Army, even though it feeds by UWSA, which is the most closest ally of China, United War State Army, but still it doesn't share, like on paper, it doesn't share it doesn't like to share the close relationship with China, and same with RCSS and with Kachin Kia as well. And these parties, in fact, they have claimed that that Three Brotherhood has used drones which are made in China, and also they have made a statement saying that also they have publicly made a statement claiming their dissatisfaction with 3BHA. And it is also significant, as I said, that China also considers the Restoration Council of San State, RCSS, as a threat, considering its non-communist origin. And which is what is far more interesting is that very recently, just 2 days back, RCSS WeChat account was banned. They had all this. Okay, this is I haven't already shared. If I haven't already said it, all these ethnic armed organizations, they have their official WeChat account, and where they post. And UWS, because RCSS WeChat account was banned 2 days ago, because probably the reason is RCSS has asked UWSA for their more participation in the ongoing conflict, where UWSA is mostly neutral, but they are fighting, but they are not, they haven't made a statement making their position against junta, and which even, in fact, after February 2021 coup, UWSA was the one party which is also the leader of FNCC, that they haven't made their position clear against the junta. So it was interesting for me that that when their WeChat account was banned. So I already spoke about a little about the connection between the ethnic armed organizations and China, but talking more about it, so these 8 powerful armed organizations in the Shan state, they have among them the United War State Army and MNDAA. They have communist origin, and also in a recent post in Chinese Weibo, where the poster has mentioned that both UWSA and MNDAA, they possess a pro-China attitude, and which is why the link between, which is why it is important to see the link between these EAOs, how far China can extract its leverage by having close connection with these EAOs. The founding leaders of the ethnic armed organizations, they also acknowledge their connection with the Communist Party of China. For example, MNDA's father, Feng Jiashan, even though he had a split with the Communist Party of Burmese Communist Party, and then he went ahead and found Myanmar Justice Party, but yet his son, who is the current commander-in-chief of MNDAA, he has received his education in China with the sponsorship of Communist Party of China, and which was publicly there in the website of MNDAA. So this says a lot about how much connection China harbors. And another thing is, when the Burmese Communist Party was dissolved in 1989 and entered a ceasefire with Tatmadaw, the EAOs, they started controlling a large swaths of territory in Chinese border in Shan states, like UWSA, they have their own autonomous territory. So these groups mostly often, they don't only fight against the junta, but they also fight for their greater autonomy in their territory. And China also, in return, supports the legitimacy of the autonomous zones which are established in the Kachin and northern in Shan states, both east and northern Shan states. And another interesting fact is that the Chinese New Year celebration in Chinese New Year in February, mostly these ethnic organizations, they had FPNCC. They have a tradition of celebrating with whoever is Chinese special envoy at that time. For example, since 2015, Sun Guoxing, he has regularly visited Fangshan, which is in Eastern Shan and the capital of UWSA, Hua State, and they have attended the Chinese New Year celebration every year until 2019. And in fact, in 2019, Sun Guoxing was also invited to participate in the 38th anniversary of peace celebration of UWSA. So this says a lot about China's connection and how brotherly and how close and warm connection China shares, and how these arms organizations are comfortable with China. And another reason is these ethnic organizations are clearly anti-Burma, which is the majority. Burma ethnicity is the major ethnicity in Myanmar. So these ethnic organizations shares an anti-Burma, and both the military junta and not even NLD is pro-Burma, and China also has discomfort with Naypyiaw's pro-Burma policy. So this also brings these organizations close to China. So all these factors played a role. I already mentioned the split between ethnic armed organizations, like the Kachin Independence Army is not apprehensive of China's direct influence and China's distrust with the RCSS and the Shan State Progressive Party. When Kia and RCSS has joined a New Zealand PDF, but UWSA it did not join the PDF army. These all factors, close relationship and the division between the EAOs, it gives China a bargaining chip, what I like to call a bargaining chip in Myanmar's peace talk. So where does China stands in Myanmar's peace talk, in the post-coup Myanmar's peace process? And is there actually a peace process happening after the coup? So before we go back to post-coup, and I would like to just briefly mention about before the coup, how China was engaged with the peace process. It was Chinese engagement was China's engagement in 2015. China's engagement was increased after 2015 when Chinese three of Chinese nationals were killed in an escalated conflict in Kokang region. So China was present in Myanmar's peace process, but after 2015, China has just intensified its involvement because Chinese citizens were put harm by the conflicts, and China also, right after the Kokang conflict, the MNDAA, it shared a joint statement where it mentioned that the ceasefire between the junta and MNDAA was possible only because of the Chinese government request. And in fact, in Sun Guoxing, the special Chinese appointed special envoy, he were until 2019 he played the role of mediator to bring EAOs to have a talk with the junta and NLD government. And China, in fact, China was helping with the budget. China was funding the peace process. China has I don't exactly remember the number, but $1 million to the National Peace Reconciliation Center was established with China's help, with China's budget. And they have went so far too further that they were in fact providing vehicles to the FNCC members to come and attend. If China was kind of skeptical, what if they would not attend the peace talk? And in 2018, they have sent vehicles. So the EAOs also did not have any opportunity. They have to attend. Kind of that much pressure. China was pressurizing the EAOs. At that time, Beijing's primary in 2013, which is in been coming into power, and the launch of BRI, Beijing's primary motivation in during that time was that they needed somewhat stability in Myanmar to launch their BRI project. So Chinese government went up and above to pressurize the FNCC members to join the peace process. So coming after 2021, the whole peace process was stalled. But the military regime's failure to deter the ethnic armed organization offensive and the PDF resistance movement led. When the PDM resistance movement started, the junta chief Ang Liang, he tried to revive the peace talks. So since April 2022, the military government opened a channel with members of Federal Political Negotiations and Consultative Committee with the hope of resuming the peace talks in Myanmar. So initially, Beijing wasn't directly involved did not involve itself in the early dialogue between the junta and FNCC, but UWSA was the only FNCC members who agreed to hold a dialogue with the junta, and at the same time it was back in summer 2022 before China has started involved itself with the peace process. The Kachin Independence Army at that time rejected junta's offer to come forward and start a negotiation with the military junta for the peace talk. Beijing actively started pursuing the EAOs in late 2022 in December, when Tang Shijun was appointed as a special envoy of Asian affairs. So behind Beijing re-engagement, there are two major factors that played role. One is internal and one is external. The first internal factor was the growing proximity of FPNCC member Kia and NUG. In September 2022, Kia refused to attend FPNCC meetings, which means it was also defying China and UWSA, which is the leader of FPNCC. And not surprisingly, right after that, Chinese government extended its diplomatic maneuvers by holding frequent meetings with FPNCC members. Beijing in December 2022 sent Tang Shijun to meet the leaders of FPNCC members in Kunming. They invited the leaders to Kunming. One of the talking points of Tang Shijun's first meeting with FPNCC was impeding EAOs to force, stopping EAOs to force closer ties with NUG. So FPNCC, as I mentioned, the largest negotiating bloc of Myanmar's EAOs, and in their second meeting, and it was very, for China, it was very dissatisfying, upsetting for China that there was an internal discord between FPNCC members, Kia and UWSA. And in their second meeting, Tang Shijun emphasized on China's disappointment regarding the division between FPNCC members, and then China's negotiated, and the three members of FPNCC, UWSA, SPP, and NDA agreed to hold talks with junta. And after the second meeting, there was an agreement. Well, there was an agreement signed between UWSA, SSPP, NDA, and with the junta's National Solidarity and Peacemaking Negotiation Committee, which outlined a preliminary framework for the new peace process. The other members, however, they did not. They refrained from holding talks with the military government. Along with this internal dynamic, China was also alarmed by the authorization of the Burma Act by the United States in the same time as a part of the which is a part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which came in late December in 2022. The Burma Act had provisions for US technical aid and assistance to EAOs and PDF involved in Myanmar's resistance movement. The worry of Chinese government was flared up when there was a news by Voice of America, the news website Voice of America, that NUZ will open its government in exile in Washington, and the news came in December 2022. But NUZ did open its first foreign office in Washington DC, but that happened in February 2023. So even which are the reasons why China re-engaged itself with Myanmar's peace process, started to re-engage since December 2022. However, unlike the pre-coup Myanmar, Chinese government attempt to close coordinate with Myanmar's EAOs to pursue them to take active part in the peace negotiation has not been overtly successful. In fact, many of the signatories of the National Ceasefire Agreement, which was signed in 2015, many of the signatories now are marking their exit. For example, even they could not, even small EIOs in that matter, it matters because FPNCC was not a part of the NCA. If I haven't mentioned it earlier. So the PAO National Liberation Organization, PNLO, which has formally declared their exit from NCA. So in such circumstances, it was Chinese government, when the operation happened, it gave Chinese government another chance to closely hold talks with the ethnic armed organizations. So the question is why it is important for Chinese government to keep EIOs closer. I have already talked about the historic ties, but economic. We know about the Chinese government projects in the Rakhine state, but these 8 ethnic armed organizations, they are based in Shan state, which is in northern Myanmar. So there are also many Chinese projects are happening in Shan state, which is also very lesser known, such as there is this strategic port project in eastern part of Shan state, which started in 2022. It's called Wang Fong Port Upgrade Project, and which is supposed to be funded by Chinese government, the LMC fund, a special fund. And there is also in Tachi Lake district, which is in the eastern part of Shan states. The port is in Tachi Lake district. And apart from that, there is also in the eastern part of the Salween River, the LMC Chinese governments were wanted to the resumption of the hydropower plants. So we know about the Chinese government's sea trade corridors, which is what we mainly emphasize about, but also there are land corridors which are Chinese governments wanted to build through Shan, which goes through Shan state, and many of these projects were inaugurated in 2022, between 2021 and started to formulate between 2021 and 2022. And one is the official land sea trade route which start from Chongqing, and then it goes through Lanchang, Qinshao, then Mandalay, then Yangon, Singapore, and the last is via Indian Ocean. And so it passes through Lanchang and also the Kokang self, Qinshao, which is in Kokang self-administered district. And apart from the Tali railway, there is also the Muse Mandalay railway. So that this railway is also goes through the Shan state. But there is another proposal which was proposed apart from the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, CMEC, there were other corridors were also proposed in 2021, which was one of which was Laukai, which was part of the CMC Plus proposals, Laokai to Linchang Economic Corridor. And Linchang is based in Shan. So this was one of the reason that this ethnic armed organizations, because of their control in territories in the Shan state, they act as a protector of Chinese projects. In fact, they keep sharing their statement in Irauri. If you go look at Irauri newspaper or Shan State newspaper, these organizations, they continuously, they also use the vowed for protecting Chinese interest, Chinese projects in Myanmar. So as I mentioned, that the anti-Chinese sentiments were brooding, considering that among the Myanmar citizens, because due to China's ties with military junta. So there is this foundation called Heartland Foundation, which was formed as a watchdog team to monitor the BRI by the netizens by 20 civil society organizations in northern Shan state. So this shows that how unhappy local population in Myanmar were against Chinese projects. So this. Due to this factor, if Chinese government keeps the EAOs closed, then they could influence the locals in northern Shan state as well, and for the Chinese projects to keep going for the betterment of, or for the execution of Chinese projects, because and these are the reasons why China wants to keep the EAOs closer, because neither the NLD government nor the junta could give China that much assurance of protecting their projects like the EAOs does. And China also, the border guard forces of the military government, which is also responsible for protecting Chinese project. But however, China is aware that border guard forces are not that not that reliable, and secondly, they do not have that much weaponry that could actually protect Chinese projects. So for this reason, it is also important for China to have a close ties with the EAOs. Now coming back to the current mediation, the Operation 1027. When the Operation 1027 happened, the Chinese government did not offer immediate brokerage, despite there is a border instability. Chinese border cities in the Chinese newspaper, it's called Nanchong Wang. There was a news that it's a huge report where where the Myanmar citizens in the border areas, they published the situation in the border areas, where in Laokai area, where the citizens were flooding in the border in the Ruli port and Nanshang port, and they were talking about their plight, and they were ethnically Chinese, and their plight in the conflict, and they wanted to take refuge in China. However, the Chinese government has immediately had closed the border pass at that time. But Chinese government, even though there was a possible refugee flow from the Myanmar border to China, Chinese government did not take immediate action. The Chinese government, as we have already mentioned, only in January became the host to negotiate the conflict between, which led to the ceasefire agreement. So there was the main reason was the Chinese government larger interest at this time was the eradication of the cybercrimes, which was since 2021, the Chinese Ministry of Public Security were involved, and in fact, they have also established joint police patrolling with Myanmar, Yunnan and Myanmar in the border to eradicate the cybercrimes. There was, according to the Ministry of Public Security, there was 31,000 Chinese nationals were involved in with the online fraud gangs, and one of the most significant target was Pai Shoucheng, who was a key ally of Ming Ang Liang. So when the Operation 1027 happened, the Three Brotherhood Alliance, they have mentioned that one of the objective of their operation is also to stop the cybercrime, and which is why China's interest was aligned with the 3BHA, and China waited until the crime fraud was actually 3BHA, where the targets were given to Chinese government, and then China started the temporary ceasefire. So after that, also Chinese special envoy Tang Shujin, he also hold the second round of peace talks.
Can you try and conclude now?
Yes, sir. Just 3 more lines. So that the third meeting, as I have mentioned, it happened in March, and which has led, which was in Kunming, and in the report, as I mentioned, that in the agreement, it was mentioned that the inclusion of border port management, protection of Chinese trade in Myanmar, and cracking down of drug and cyber crimes in border are the key provisions for in the peace negotiation term between ethnic armed groups and the junta. So with this, I'd stop talking and I would finish my talk for today, and hope I was able to give you a little, because with all the actors, within Myanmar and then China, so Myanmar is a really complex whole. To dig all the actors, it is not possible in a 30-minute talk. But I hope I have given you a little bit of new information in my talk. Thank you so much for patiently listening to me.
Thank you very much, Jayashree. In fact, you have given us very good insights into a very, very complex situation in Myanmar and the kind of role China is trying to play there. If you permit, I'll have a couple of questions for you, then we'll ask others to pose questions. One, something which you referred to, that is there a real peace process going on in Myanmar today? After breakdown of temporary ceasefire of 10th, 11th January, within 24 hours, in fact, you referred to subsequent efforts, but those efforts seem to be focused more on protecting China's interests rather than really, any kind of reconciliation between Three Brotherhood Alliance, our military government, or outfits, other outfits which are active in Myanmar. So I wanted your assessment that how do you see prospects of any significant movement in the peace process in Myanmar with Chinese mediation? That's one. Second question, which I wanted you to explore. You're working on the larger theme of China's peacemaking in fragile states in Southeast Asia. In recent years, China has tried to act as a peacemaker in different theaters, including in Myanmar, Sudan. It has special emissaries for Middle East, for instance. do you see any pattern in China's approach? And do you see any willingness on part of China to, invest in in resources, including mediation is a very very time consuming complex process. Has China really been able to sort of grow as a mediator? Because so far it doesn't have much to show for its efforts. Sudan, it made some progress, which collapsed. Myanmar, again, not much progress. So what is your take on China as a mediator, not only in Myanmar but in other theaters as well? Is there a pattern? Is there kind of commitment or bandwidth on part of China? So these two questions, if you could try and address, then we'll open the floor for comments and questions from others.
Thank you so much, sir, for the questions. I'll start with the second question because my PhD and then I worked on Chinese foreign policy approach to peace building in conflicted countries, which was my PhD on. So this is what I tried to look at. Is there any pattern when China engages itself with the conflicted states? Actually, not conflicted state, but Shiv Shankar Menon. Sir has recently, in 2022, he wrote an article for Brookings, I think Brookings CSEP, and on Chinese engagement in SA, South Asia. And he has mentioned that there is no particular pattern in Chinese engagement in SA, and sorry, there is a pattern of engagement in SA, but this pattern is very different from how China engages with India. So borrowing from his words, even here in peace building, there is the pattern is actually very similar whether China engages with Myanmar or Afghanistan or Sudan. First of all, negotiating with all the parties in the conflict. And like China, for example, in Afghanistan, China's relationship with Taliban, and it was established even before Taliban came to power. Taliban's recent taking over of Afghanistan government, and same with Myanmar. Not because for Myanmar we understand because Myanmar shares a border with China, and China has more further complex interest in Myanmar than in Afghanistan or in Sudan. But if we talk about a Chinese approach to peace building or mediation, mediation is just a part of China's entire approach of peace building, and which actually China started since 2013 defense papers. Since 2013, in every defense paper, China was increasingly using words that were going towards that, okay, at one point China will also have a peace building approach, which will try to counter the Western approach to peace building, which is based on the values of liberal democracy. So what is more interesting in where China engages is China doesn't care like whether the country is authoritarian or what values that the countries in conflict have. Like they don't it could be democracy, it could not be democracy, and which is why it makes attractive for those governments as well to engage China, because China doesn't really care whether it is Taliban or the other party in power. China did not, for Myanmar as well, did not care whether it is NLD or the military junta. So this is why China's mediation is it's becoming very popular. I won't say it was popular, and this is also related to the larger goal of Chinese foreign policy. It is not only China is mediating not only because it has its interest stake in those countries, but also because since China is growing as a power, like in every field there is a theory with Chinese characteristics, and since today's geopolitics, it's the conflicts, the number of fragile states are also increasing. So earlier, until Sudan, China wasn't present, China did not know what to do, and now China with its economic power, China doesn't only want its economic power, but also want to use it. Also want to show itself as a normative power, with having not only providing economy but also trying to host. But Chinese mediation, your question, can China grow as a mediator? But it has, even though China has been engaging with mediation, but since the more difficulty is arises because China doesn't push that much. For example, in Myanmar also, it has the ability, this is completely my opinion, I could be wrong, but considering its relations with UWSA, it has the ability to push the ethnic armed organizations to against the junta and topple the government. But according to the Chinese theory of peace building, it doesn't believe in regime change, which is one of the outcome of my thesis. So they would not try to change their regime. They would not push for a regime change. So we cannot say how far China would be successful as a mediator in that sense if China doesn't have a clear stand. For example, when the Western powers, they come to peace building, even though it's we don't want to go to the intervention and their approach, but still they have a stand that we would try to establish democracy in that country. So in that sense, since China, other than economic stabilization of the conflicted countries, China doesn't have any other values. So I cannot really say how much Chinese mediation will mean so far. But that doesn't actually also, it doesn't mean that China would be a failure as a mediator as well, because China will engage itself as a mediator, and the countries as well will seek China's mediation apart also, because it is easier for them to have a talk with China than with other countries. I hope.
Yeah, okay, thanks. No,
Thank you, sir.
the problem appears to be that in none of these situations, China is really getting involved beyond a point, whether it's Sudan or Ukraine or Afghanistan, Middle East. It appoints special emissaries, but doesn't quite get involved. Myanmar is different, as you rightly pointed out, because it has much greater stakes there. Now the floor is open for questions and comments. We have a question from Rajkumar. Essentially, is asking that is there a similar role for India in Myanmar peace process?
I'll answer to this and then go back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I do think this is my perception, this is completely my view, that I do think India could play a role. If not, it should at least, because NLD also had faith in, probably would have more faith in India than China for obvious reasons. Ethnic organizations, I'm not sure of how if India could have ties with ethnic organizations, because in China's case, it's completely different. I think both, at least the NLD will appreciate if India wants to host or be a part of the peace process. Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
Vijay sir, we could explain more.
We'll invite him to make some comments. We can't let him get away. I have one more question from Ashutosh Vashisht. He has first complimented you on your insightful presentation.
Thank
and
you.
The question is whether China's engagement in Myanmar goes against its basic principle of non-interference, upon which two countries established their diplomatic relations way back in 1954, and whether Operation 1027 has further entangled China in Myanmar's domestic politics.
Yes, that's what we were talking about. So, just decoding a little bit of China's non-interference principle, which I think these days it is more of non-military intervention rather than non-interference per se. So, when we say non-interference, then it would mean any sort of interference, no political interference. But what Chinese government, I think, mean when they say non-interference, they mean non-military interference. So in that standpoint, they would be correct that there is no, because they always compare itself with the Western governments where they intervene in country with armed forces, and which Chinese government is not doing, and which is what I think they mean by non-interference these days. If we have to decode non-interference as a political interference, then we have already seen, like, we cannot say that China is not interfering in Myanmar's politics.
Okay. Now I'll request Ambassador Nambiar if he could come in and offer some comments. He has extensive experience in Myanmar as a UN Special Envoy.
Oh God, thank
There's
you.
also in China, so.
Thank you very much. It was a fascinating conversation here. In fact, sort of analysis which Jayashree has presented, and it shows that she has a lot of she has actually been following very closely all the details of the developments that are going. But in terms of the more you get into the details in Myanmar, the more you lose sight of the overall picture. It's a very strange situation, at least as far as I can see sometimes. But despite that, she has got some very, very strong overall sort of broad stroke perceptions, which I think are very valuable. And I think it's for example, you talked to the peace process. There was a time when the peace process, particularly as you said, after the Kokang incident, etc., when these three Chinese were killed, they immediately got hold of the old group. That is during the Thein Sein days, when the railway minister, was called along with them, and then the peace process started for the first time, as it were. And at that time, the Tatmadaw, particularly, was very keen, and it managed to persuade the ethnic armed groups also that this peace process should not take place outside the country, but it should be inside the country. And they managed then to build a peace process inside the country. They had it in various places, including areas which was, in particularly in the Kachin state, etc., and then of course in Myanmar, in the capital in Yangon, and in Naypyidaw. So that thing, in a sense, it moved on, and eventually, when the NLD under Aung San Suu Kyi continued that process, it continued in that framework, and then you had the NCA, etc. But there was at that stage also a certain amount of ambivalence among what is now called the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which they had not really been part of the NLD. And at that stage, if you notice, initially the Chinese presence, it almost came by oversight. Initially, they were a little upset. They were very upset at the UN being involved in a very marginal way, in fact, in a sense. But the Myanmar parties, both the government as well as the ethnic armed groups, were keen on having outsiders apart from China involved in the peace process. And that is really the reason why the UN, I myself got involved, is because they said that you need to be involved. But it was clear at that time also that this had to be done with at least some kind of a tacit acceptance by China also. You could not, they knew that it would be in a sense dysfunctional to have any process which the Chinese did not buy into, even if it was unwillingly. So from that point of view, despite the strong interests that the Western powers showed in getting involved in the peace process, the UN was, in some ways, along with others, I and the Secretary General were somewhat at least successful in getting the Western powers to lay off, as it were, in this peace process. And while we said we would brief them of what is happening, we didn't want them to interfere because, as you say, in many of these things, you talk about the way in which the Chinese, their overall view of peace process, etc. They would not involve, they would not interfere, they certainly would not be military intervention. But there is one red line which they certainly would put down, and that is no outside interference, particularly for the West. If that were to happen, I don't know whether even this idea of Chinese intervention in terms of they would probably also, they would move along their red lines also. So that is one process. And unfortunately for us, in general, even for Myanmar too, the way in which the events eventually took place and the junta, the coup, etc., actually set back the process, the peace process in a different way. And eventually, it actually became China's responsibility. Almost the Chinese were willy-nilly brought into the process, and they were able, in a sense, to extract whatever advantage they could from the situation. And today you have a system where, in fact, the NCA is really now almost passé, and you have the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which is really dictating some kind of a peace process. And even you are talking about a peace process, which is really not so much a process as a band-aid, which is being used in order to not cause a kind of certain irreversible damage to Chinese interests on the one hand, and to the interests of some of the ethnic groups and the Tatmadaw. So it is just a kind of a holding operation which they're trying to do. And I don't think that the way in which things are going, you are finding increasingly the question of the unity of the country is also becoming a question. And yet, there's a certain strong no's in the Tatmadaw. I mean, they have the 3 non-disintegrations and things like that, which they talk about. How are they going to manage that? Today, it looks as if, in a sense, in reality, the country has been divided. It was true that it was never really united, but the idea of the Tatmadaw as being able to ensure a broad kind of a, sort of unification of the country. Today, even the Bamar areas are now divided as between the government, the junta, and the PDF forces and things like that. So that is a big problem. And I think the Chinese are worried about this because of the impact this will have. And therefore, they're having this, it is a band-aid. Why is it that the regional project, why is it that you've not talked about the regional sort of approach, as it were? Why is it that ASEAN, in fact, I think as a region, ultimately Myanmar is part of ASEAN, and there has to be a peace process, a kind of a process to bring peace into the country. Of course, China is an important factor, but it would have to involve ASEAN too, to a considerable extent, and inevitably, I think also India. That is not being really considered to an extent. I think there is still suspicion, I feel, in some quarters, particularly in China, I feel, that this will become a kind of a, there may be an incipient regime change, there's the liberal values, all the kind of things. How do you avoid all that and yet have a process, however gradual, that will move mainly under the leadership or under the stewardship of ASEAN, with the involvement of China and India in a process that will bring a certain element of stability in Myanmar? And I think that is the million-dollar question, which actually has evaded answer so far, mainly because the situation is not clear, because each group, each of the major ethnic armed groups, in fact, now the Three Brotherhood Alliance has grown in a manner which 10 years ago it was not. It's become quite different. I mean, the balance as between the different forces is completely different. And there is increasing feeling among the ethnic armed groups that they can change the balance even as between themselves and the Tatmadaw, which is the problem. Now, there's increasing sense that the regime is out of touch with reality, even though I don't think that it's going to be toppled very quickly or anything like that. But it seems to be increasingly out of touch with reality. How do you change that process? I think that's the $1,000,000 question. And I don't know if Jayashree has any kind of if you have any views on that, because I'm really, some of your perceptions regarding the Chinese approach to the peace process is really very, very, very useful to have. No regime change, as you said. There's no question that they will be, in a sense, interfere in that sense militarily, but they don't care about the values. That again, I agree that they will deal with all the parties concerned, and they have been dealing with it. But I think even within that, there are some parties which have greater degree of accessibility, greater degree of influence, and greater degree of leverage. And those are the ones which are part of the old South Yunnan. And that, I think, that is inevitable again, which is historical. But even in that, you are seeing a totally non-Han, as it were, ethnic armed group, which is the Arakan Army, which is nothing really. It is right in the Arakans, but they've developed a strong relationship and link. They're independent, but at the same time, they have strong links with the Chinese, and that accounts that, in a sense, again, I think the Chinese have been very, in a sense, long-term in terms of their interests in the Rakhine also. I would like to, I think that there has to be some way in which we can bring the neighbors together, the main countries, perhaps ASEAN as one group, India and China, and it does not, I think that the Chinese will not, obviously they will not believe that India has an agenda in Myanmar, which is a Western agenda. We have an agenda, the Chinese have an agenda too, but the agenda does not necessarily involve a breakup of the country or destabilization of the country. Whatever our interests may be, whether the Chinese and the Indian government both see the need for a stable Myanmar. And that stabilization can be brought through the ASEAN. And I think unless you are able to move in that kind of a thing, however much our bilateral problems may be there, I think it is important to persuade them for that. And even today, I don't think even the UN has much credibility in terms of that peace process. So whether it should be through the UN, I don't know, because the moment you get through the UN, you get the Security Council, and then you have this the P5, and that puts paid to some of these things. So I don't know what your views on this are. I'm very, very quickly, I've mentioned some of these points. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, those were really insightful comments. I'll request Jayashree to respond briefly, and also just if she could briefly comment on this issue, whether India can learn some lessons from Chinese approach, in terms of engaging simultaneously with Tatmadaw, with Three Brotherhood Alliance, other EAOs. Do we need similar, change in our policy, a more flexible, a more sort of promiscuous approach towards Myanmar?
Yeah. I'll just go to that. Just we are running out of gas. Need to recharge.
Thank you so much,
Vijay
Nambiar, sir. It was really insightful for me as well to learn, to know, what you have mentioned. I do agree with you that there should be a ASEAN India plus ASEAN China plus India approach for if we actually want peace in Myanmar, if we actually want stability in Myanmar, then definitely all the ASEAN, China, and India should able to work together and as you mentioned that we both India and China both have interest in Myanmar, and but then it again will lead to the question that we will get the Indian Ocean, that both the competition between the trade competition between India and China. But I think they can after Myanmar is stabilized, and they can fight against again. They can have the competition again for the trade competition. But right now we could all the parties could focus on bringing peace in Myanmar. For example, India is you asked me about India's if India could follow the same approach. Actually, if not same, I would say that India also has. If not recognized, but India also Indian official also have recognized junta. Am I correct? I think.
We work with them.
Yeah. So in that sense, EIOs it's complicated. EIOs is complicated, but maybe we could from Manipur side the from that standpoint, we can try to see if they would be interested in the EIOs who bordering with India. Would they be? I'm not sure. I haven't done a study on this. So if there is any connection, any ethnic organization which are in India's border, India-Myanmar's border, would they be comfortable talking to India? It's just me thinking out loud here. Probably that could be the approach we could follow.
Well,
and sir, actually, this is what I wanted. This is very interesting. Two things I wanted to mention. Since you talked about the old South Yunnan, and first thing is Kia, and then Western involvement. Kia, if you probably have heard of Martin Linter's the new book Was of Myanmar. So he mentioned that he is the only journalist who has been able to live in Myanmar for such a long time. And so he has mentioned that Kia has repeatedly approached the US government, but they did not get any positive result from that side, and which is why they have to go back to keep going back to China as well. That was one of the point of view that he has mentioned. And the second is also the Wa community, the ethnicity in Myanmar, and those are also present in China. So what Chinese government is now doing is that the Was in Myanmar, they don't consider the Was in China as the original was what it called. So there is now the Wa Museum was there is a trying to protecting Wa culture in Yunnan, in the border, in the other part of the border in Myanmar. So this also says that Chinese government is also trying that you are part of us. We will protect your ethnicity in. So they have a lot of policies these days in the border areas for the Was community. I just thought it's not really related, but it's very interesting to me. So I just thought I would mention.
Well, thank you, Jayashree. We really had fascinating conversation, which was enriched so much more by Ambassador Nambiar's presence as comments. I will not try to sum up this discussion. Just wanted to make one small point that China's track record as an effective mediator in peace building projects has been undermined to a considerable extent because of its proclivity to look at those situations too narrowly through prism of its own interests, whether it's Sudan or Afghanistan or Myanmar or Ukraine. It has not really been able to make any significant breakthrough, because as a mediator, while obviously you don't disregard your own interests, but somewhere you have to take a more sort of objective stance, which China has not been capable of that. Plus, I don't think they have yet developed the expertise for playing a meaningful mediatory role. I mean, this is something which is a very challenging exercise. I'll conclude here with this discussion by thanking Dr. Jayashree Bora in particular and all the members of the audience for discussions we had this afternoon. Thank you. And thanks to ICS also, back to colleagues from ICS.
Sir, so do we now have your formal permission to bring an end to today's seminar?
Please do that, yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So with this, we would wrap up the session, and we thank Dr. Jayashree Bora and Ambassador Ashok K. Kanta for giving us their precious time and gracing the seminar with their valuable insights. The video of today's discussion will be available on the ICS YouTube platform. We extend an invitation to all for the upcoming Wednesday seminar titled Issues and Factors Shaping Chinese Research of Indian Literature from 1950 to 2010. Details about the seminar can be found on the ICS website, or you could also subscribe to our newsletter for timely updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you. Thank you.